What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around. Nowadays, when a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. Either you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big as a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads.
So, what I want to know is how often do all these hairy faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us on Sunday nights? Do they use rub hair tonic to stop their hairy faces from going bald?
I don't know, but next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Mr. Twit was one of those very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead and his eyes and his nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted and revolved in tufts out of his ear holes and his nostrils. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and made it as all heady-faced men grew in spikes and stuck out straight out like a bristly nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash that bristly nail brushy face of his? The answer is never! Not even on Sundays. He hadn't watched it for years.
As you know, an ordinary and hairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy. If it's not washed often enough, and there's nothing awful about that. But a hairy man is a very different matter. Things cling to hair. Things like gravy. They go among and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and quickly more or less, all right. But a hairy man cannot do that.
We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces, but not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch. You will notice that if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some on its hairs.
Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there was hundreds of bits of old breakfasts and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you look closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs around his face. Spinach and tomato ketchup and fish fingers and minced chicken livers and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. If you look closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peer deep into the mustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you'll probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese, or a moldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tin sardine. All of this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. By sticking out his tongue and scrolling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find morsels here and there to nibble on. What am I trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a fool and a smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid man, as you find out that in a moment.
Mrs. Twit was no better than her husband. She did not, of course, have a hairy face like him, because that at any rate he have hidden off her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her.
Have you ever seen a woman with an uglier face than that? I adopt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit wasn't born ugly. She had quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older.
Why would that happen? I'll tell you why. If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it.
A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth. But if you have good thoughts, they will shine out like onto your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. Nothing shown out of Mrs. Twit's face.
In her right hand, she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing in the sole of her left foot, and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried the walking stick so she can hit things like dogs and cats and small children. Mrs. Twit had a glass eye that was always looking the other way.
You can play a lot of tricks with the glass eye because you can take it out and pop it back in again anytime you like. You can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all the tricks. One morning, she took out a glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's mug of beer when he wasn't looking. Mr. Twit sat there drinking his beer slowly. Froth made a white ring on the hairs around his face. He wiped the white froth on his sleeve and wiped the sleeve onto his trousers.
You're plotting something. Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know you very well. You're plotting something.
Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plodding away like mad. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day.
You better be careful because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat.
Oh, do shut up, you old hag.
He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest hornet trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, as Mrs. Twit dipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught a sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eye staring up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump.
I told you I was watching you. I've got eyes everywhere, so you better be careful.
To pay her back for the glass eye, he decided to put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He carried a big one down the pond at night. Mrs. Twit is in the bedroom getting ready for bed and waited for the fun begin. He climbed into her bed, turned off the lights, and lay back, scratching her tummy. Her tummy was itchy. Dirty old hags like her has itchy tummies. Then all at once, she felt cold and slimy, crawling over her feet. She screamed,
What's the matter with you?
"Oh, something's in my..."
I bet it's a giant skeleton I saw on the floor just now. I tried to kill it, but it got away. It's got teeth like screwdrivers.
Oh, it's all over my feet.
You'll bite off your toes.
Mrs. Tit waited. Mr. Tit got out of the bed, fed a jug of cold water. He poured it in Mrs. Twit's head. The frog crawled up under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one is having a good time. When Mrs. Twit came in, the frog jumped on Mrs. Tit's face. That's not a nice thing to do at anyone's bed at night. Mrs. Twit leaped out downstairs and spent the night with the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow.
The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog leg, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms, just big, long ones, and put them in a tin. She carried the tin back to the house under her apron. At 1 o'clock, she cooked spaghetti for lunch, and she mixed the worms in with the spaghetti, but only for her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese.
Hey, my spaghetti's moving.
It's a new kind. It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot.
Mr. Twit started eating the long tomato-covered strings around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon the tomato sauce was all over his hairy chin.
Not as good as the ordinary kind. It's too squishy.
I find it very tasty.
She was watching him from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure for watching him eating worms.
I find it rather bitter, disgusting bitter. Find the other one next time.
Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plate full.
You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy?
Why?
And why it had a nasty bitter taste?
Why?
Because it's worms.
Pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought it was really clever and nasty trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of bed and took her walking stick downstairs to his workshed. There, he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, onto the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small, the next morning, Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. The following night, Mr. Twit stuck on another tiny bit of wood. Every night, he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like a part of the old stick. Gradually, but oh so gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer. Now, when something is going very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it happening. You, yourself, for example, are actually growing taller every day that goes by. But you wouldn't think it, would you? It's happening so slowly, you can't even notice it from 1 week to the next. It was the same with Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was also slow and gradual, that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder.
That stick's too long for you.
Why so it is? I had the feeling there was something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think what it was.
There's something wrong, right?
What kind of happened? It must have suddenly grown longer.
Don't be a fool. How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of dead wood. Isn't it? Dead wood can't grow. Not the stick. It's you. It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time now.
That's not true.
You're shrinking, woman.
It's not possible.
Oh yes, it jolly well is. You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why? You must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days.
Never.
Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the strings. That's what you've got. You've got the dreaded strings.
Mrs. Twit felt so trembly he had to sit down. As soon as Mrs. Twit sat down, Mr. Twit pointed at her and shouted,
There you are, sitting in your same old chair. You shrunk so much, your feet aren't even touching the ground.
Mrs. Twit looked down at her feet, and by golly, the man was right. Her feet were not touching the ground. Mr. Twit, you see, had been just as clever with the chair as he'd been with the walking stick. Every night, when he had a little extra tiny thickness to the end of the walking stick, he did the same to the four legs of Mrs. Twit's chair.
Just look at you sitting in your same old chair. You shrunk so much, your feet are dangling in the air. You've got the shrinks. You've got them badly. You've got the most terrible case of shrinks I've ever seen.
Mrs. Twit became so frightened she began to dribble, but Mr. Twit, still remembering the words in his spaghetti, didn't feel sorry for her at all.
I suppose you know what happens when you get the shrinks.
What?
Your head shrinks into your neck, and your neck shrinks into your body, and your body shrinks into your legs, and your legs shrinks into your feet. And in the end, there's nothing left except a pair of shoes and a bundle of old clothes.
I can't bear it.
It's a terrible disease, the worst in the world.
How long have I got? How long before I end up with a bundle of clothes and a pair of shoes?
The rate you're going, I'd say not more than 10 or 11 days.
Anything we can do?
There's only one cure for the shrinks.
Tell me quickly.
We'll have to hurry.
I'm ready. I'll hurry. I'll do anything you say.
You won't last long if you don't.
What must I do?
You've got to be stretched.
Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground.
Stand here.
Mr. Twit said, pointing to the iron ring. Then he tied Mrs. Twit's bodies to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloon with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the string to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body, some to her around her neck, some under her arms, some under her wrists, even some to her hair. Soon there were 50 colored balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head.
Can you feel them stretching you? I can. It's stretching me like mad.
He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now, feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons. She was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly.
Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground? If those strings are around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye for me.
And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea.
There's enough to take me to the moon.
To take you to the moon? What a ghastly thought. We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh dear me, no.
We most certainly wouldn't. Put more strings around my ankles, quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe.
Very well, my angel.
And with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet and took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket.
Help! Save me!
But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds, she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below looking up.
What a pretty sight. How lovely all those balloons. At least the old hag is lost and gone forever. I love my beard.